Hi there, Fix That Car here with a piece on how to replace the water pump on a Hyundai i10. This is a later version of the i10. It's a 1 litre engine with 3 cylinders. That's helpful because there's plenty of space at this end of the engine bay as there's only 3 cylinders. So why am I replacing this water pump? The reason is there's a noise just after startup. It's been there for some time, a bit of a raspy noise that comes and goes, and it's only just shown itself as being the bearing in the water pump. This car's only covered some 25,000 miles, it's just out of warranty, so it's a poor failure, and we'll look at why it's failed in a moment. Just looking at where the water pump is, down here at the side of the engine bay there's a belt pulley, and the water pump sits behind that belt pulley. Also on the auxiliary belt we have an alternator, and right down the bottom there we've got air conditioning. So there's a lot for this auxiliary belt to handle. As such, it has to be very tight to take all that load, and it's that tightness that is putting a large load on that particular bearing, which I think is poor design, probably the reason why it's failed. Let's have a look at the replacement part I've purchased. I've gone for Blueprint, which are supposedly as close as you can get to original manufacturer's parts without actually buying the original manufacturer's part. And there's a seal here. I can return this component if it's the wrong one or I don't like it for some reason, as long as that's not broken. So how about this for a top tip? Don't open at the top of the box, open from underneath, and there's just a couple of spots where the box is glued together, so it's very easy to put that together if you want it to make it look as if it's not been opened. What's inside the box? Well, we've got some grub screws. I shan't be using those. We've got a gasket, which I will be using, and of course we've got the water pump. Those grub screws will fit in here, but on this case there's a belt pulley which is held in place with 4 bolts, so we'll just be reusing those 4 bolts. Looking at this, the design comes from a much older design of engine. This particular water pump, or this style of water pump, is designed to take a plastic fan at the front of an engine, as cars used to have in the dim and distant past. Clearly what Hyundai have done is they've turned their engine sideways to make it transverse, but they haven't bothered to redesign the water pump. Instead, they've just taken an old water pump design and come up with a pulley that fits around the piece the fan will fit on, in order that the belt can drive it. And it's clearly putting a lot of force on the bearing in that housing, which will be the reason this has failed early. So Hyundai, I'm going to give you 0 points out of 10 for design. This is poor. The i10 is known as a car for reliability, but this piece is not in that category. Let's get on with the replacement. I'm going to completely replace the coolant. So first thing to do is loosen off the coolant cap and actually disconnect the battery for safety reasons. Turn the heater up to maximum to open the heater. Then from underneath the car release the drain plug, which can be found in the bottom corner of the radiator. That's just here. There is a shroud here and the coolant will come out underneath, so I'm going to place a little tube underneath to try and capture that coolant and run it into a pod. Here we go. Part of the reason for collecting this is to measure exactly how much comes out, so I'll know how much to get back in. There will be airlocks as I put the coolant back in, and I need to know how much to expect to put in. Back on top of the car, crack the bolts on the water pump pulley while the belt's still on. This is a lot easier while the belt's still in place, as it will stop turning. The next thing is to loosen the auxiliary belt. To do this, first of all loosen the long bolt that holds the alternator in place. Then loosen the lock bolt down here on the adjuster, both marked in red. And finally get a spanner on the end of this and loosen it at the same time as pushing the alternator down. That will remove the alternator down and release all the tension in the auxiliary belt and enable it to be removed. Once loose, the auxiliary belt is easily removed, so just put it over the alternator and off its other cogs, and out it comes. If you're going to use the same alternator belt again, make sure it goes on in the same orientation, don't turn it round, as the force will have all been one way down the belt. So I'm going to carefully position this. Next thing is to undo these 4 bolts and take the pulley off of the water pump. So that's the water pump pulley. Then remove the tensioner pulley. This is in the way of 2 of the bolts that hold the water pump in place. So that's loosen off with that. Then quite good this, these are coming off relatively easy. As this car is so new, just do that carefully. Out comes that pulley with its bolt. That bearing feels quite good. That would have been another suspect, but this one seems to be fine. Next stage is to crack all these bolts that hold the water pump in place, then remove the water pump. There will be some loss of water. And I've been quite lucky here. I've cracked all these bolts around the water pump, just removing the last one, and they've all come out quite easily. The nightmare scenario is that one of these bolts has become corroded and breaks off. So hold your breath as you do this. This pump shouldn't pull off. Out it comes. Loss of water. And here is the old pump. As I turn this, you can't feel it obviously, but there's a roughness in the bearing. That's now confirmed as a problem that this car's been having. Very poor. Next thing to do is to compare this old water pump with the new. The holes appear to be in the same place, which is good. I've tested the pulley against these holes and they are in the correct location. Just turning over, we've got 2 dowels that have come away with the old water pump. It's good that they've come away and not stuck in the block or the head. And again, we've got 2 new dowels on the new pump, so that looks good. And here's a new gasket. Interestingly, this is a blueprint component which is meant to be virtually identical to the manufacturer's original, and it's not. We can see differences there. But fingers crossed it's going to perform better than the manufacturer's original, which has been very poor. Right, the new gasket is pressed in place. Rather cleverly it holds itself in the groove. I'm going to put the water pump back in place, and the first 2 bolts I'll tighten down to these 2 rounded dowels to pull those into their home. So down it goes. In situ. And 1 bolt just to swing on for the moment. And my torque wrench didn't go down as far as 10 Newton meters, so I've tightened these by feel to the sort of torque that they were up to as I took them off. Next thing to go back on is this idler wheel. This is a bit tighter because it's a single bolt that's holding it in place. The important thing here is that these bolts run into aluminium and the torques are never that high. As the engine warms up, there's a lot more strain along the length of a steel bolt that's bedded into aluminium. I'll just tighten it up and then we'll put the pulley back on. And back on with the pulley and the 4 bolts. There's no need for any Loctite, as there's a shake-proof washer on each of these bolts. Then back on with the belt, which will enable me to tighten, or finally tighten, these 4 little bolts here. Finally, refill with antifreeze. I've measured the amount I've taken out and I'm putting about the same amount in. The engine will have to be run, heated up, and then the level rechecked. That is how to replace a water pump on a Hyundai i10. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.